If you have been here for a while, you probably know about the Look for Less challenge. In this video, I am going to share my top Look for Less dupes of all time. Hey everyone, my name is Yami. I am your Latina next door. Welcome back to my channel. If you like high-end home decor DIYs on a budget, make sure to hit like on this video and subscribe so that you too can become part of the familia. If you're like me, you probably get inspired by high-end home decor stores like Ballard Designs and Pottery Barn. I love their style and their products, but they're usually pretty high-priced items, which is why I created the Look for Less challenge, where we would create some of those items that we love from those stores for a whole lot less. In this video, I'm sharing my top favorite of all time that I have created, but at the end of this video, I am going to be sharing an update on the Look for Less challenge, so make sure you stay tuned to the end in case you have been waiting on this update. Let's see which ones of my dupes made it to my all-time favorite list. So for my very first Look for Less challenge, I wanted to recreate one of these trellis mirrors that were so popular and still are. I saw this beautiful white one over at Pottery Barn for $199 and I thought I'd give it a shot. Now, this is the mirror that I found at my local Goodwill. It was $5.96. So I just basically used my Rust-Oleum chalk paint in linen white. I already had this from previous project, and I gave it 2 full coats. Then I purchased 4 dowels. These are 3/8 of an inch, and I got these from Home Depot. They were only 98 cents a piece, and I also painted them in the same white. And once everything was dry, I started placing them on top of the mirror, trying to figure out exactly where I wanted to put my grid and what size I wanted to make my squares. And then once I had that figured out, I started making my marks on my dowels and measuring to make sure I had the right measurements before I cut it. Then I used this little miter saw kit that we had on hand in order to cut them. I'll link to a smaller one below that's much better for crafts. And then I just started sanding down the edges to make sure I got a nice fit inside the frame mirror. When it came to add my perpendicular lines onto the frame, I made sure that my corners were even, and I also marked the frame where each of the dowels were going to go because I was not gluing them as I went. I was actually just laying them down, trying to get my grid and my pattern down first. Made sure that the squares were both 4 inches wide and in height. Once I knew, I marked where I was going to make my cut, and then I also marked the dowel underneath it on both sides so I knew where to place it once I made that cut. And I went ahead and kind of created the grid on all 4 corners. That way I can see how it was going to turn out after they were all put together. And then I just kept cutting and adding more to the frame. Now these are not glued as of yet. Now, since this was a smaller mirror, I could only do 2 diamonds in the center. So what I did was I measured out each center of the inside squares. This is where the diamond corners were going to touch the frame, and I made those marks on the dowels as you see here. Then I took my dowel at an angle and marked where I needed to make those cuts and inserted those diamonds. Here's the mirror with the 2 diamonds in the center. Now once I was happy with the placement of the dowels, then I started adding little dots of wood glue to the tops of them, not to adhere it to the mirror, but to adhere it to each other because I was going to pop it off and I was going to clean the mirror underneath. I ended up adding a few more dowels because I thought it was kind of empty. Then I added more glue on both sides to reinforce the frame, and I sanded the corners down. I gave the mirror a good cleaning, and then I erased any pencil marks, painted over them, and I did the same thing with the actual frame insert. And I used E6000 in order to glue the frame insert into the mirror. That way, in case there was anything that seeped out, I wouldn't really see it. Now, there were a few areas that needed to be cleaned up, so I just took some rubbing alcohol with a Q-tip and I just erased those areas away. Now, to give it a little bit of that rustic look, I took some acrylic gray paint, put it on a paper towel, and just rubbed it lightly on all the corners of the mirror to give it this look. And here is the finished product. The thing I like most about this project is that it's so customizable. You can make this a round mirror, a square mirror, a full-length mirror. You can make it any color you want to suit your color scheme. I think I did pretty good. The original on sale cost $199 versus mine, which cost me $10 for the mirror and those towels. Everything else I already had on hand. But if you needed to buy them, like the paint and maybe even the glue, it might cost you up to $20 or so. But even still, that's still an amazing bargain. Another one of my all-time favorite Look for Less dupes were inspired by these vases over at Pottery Barn. These vases ranged from $49 all the way up to $79 a piece, but I knew I can recreate these with some items that I already had on hand. I had originally started with this vase that I had picked up at my local Goodwill. I spray painted it with white semi-gloss spray paint, and I also picked up these little stencils over at Hobby Lobby. Now, after I spray painted this vase white because it was not this color, I added painter's tape and I started adding this clay-like Martha Stewart paint to the bottom. Now you can get that paint at your local Michael's or Hobby Lobby. I took a little fan artist brush and I started adding it throughout the top, adding like little pieces of clay kind of like poking through the white. And then I added a nice little rim as an accent to the top of the vase. Then I used this simple acrylic paint in this color and I cut the stencil from the larger piece and started adding it throughout the vase in this pattern. Now it will get a little messy and the stencil won't come out perfect. I did use a little bit of spray adhesive to hold the stencil in place, but as you can see, it just kept coming off. Now I did think it looked a little bit emptier than the original, so I started adding a couple of extra dots in a different color using a little craft matchstick. And that was basically it for the round one. I also had two square vases, which I also painted white. And then I used painter's tape to add that really pretty clay color on the bottom of both. Then I had a stencil and I used that same blue in order to add an even pattern all throughout the front and back of both of them. And oh my goodness, look at how these turned out. These are absolutely my favorite. And I even like how the stencils didn't come out perfectly even. I think it makes it look even more authentic. Now, I think I did pretty good, you guys. If you recall, the originals were $49 to $79 a piece. I already had two of my vases and the paint colors. All I had to get was basically that one round vase and those stencils, which I got both for 40% off with those little coupons that you get. So honestly, I was only in for $11 for all three pieces. I think I did pretty good. For the next Look for Less, which is another all-time favorite, I am going to be recreating these Booker Hurricanes that used to be available at Pottery Barn. And when they were being sold, they were going from $39 to $69 a piece, depending on the size and style. Now, the first thing you're going to need for this project are some large hurricanes. I found a couple of different sizes and in different prices, but they were all fairly inexpensive. Now, continuing on with the rest of the supplies, I'm actually going to show you guys two different ways to create this project. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I found these candle holders in my last thrift store haul, and not everybody is going to be able to find these. So I wanted to make a version that everybody could do no matter what they have access to. And for this, you're going to need this little round right here, as well as a candlestick from your local Michaels. These are very inexpensive, but I did find this one at my Goodwill for 99 cents. Now, you will also need embroidery hoops depending on the style you decide on creating. And then you're going to need these little unfinished wooden discs. I got these at my local Hobby Lobby and they were 4 to a pack. Since these were chipping, I was going to have to give it a fresh coat of paint, so I decided to go ahead and rub it with some alcohol and get them cleaned off. However, before I could paint them, I needed to adhere these little discs to the top of those candle holders. That way they were large enough to either hold the glass hurricane or the larger candle. And I just made sure to center them, and I used E6000 to hold them together. Now while those dry, I am going to make the other version. So with this candle holder that I found at Goodwill, again you can find these at your local Michaels, I am going to cut the bottom off. Alright, then after I cut the bottom off, I am going to sand the top and make it nice and smooth. Then I am going to glue it to both that small disc and the larger round. Now this round is the same size as I used as my little buffalo check mini tray. And if you look at them, once I put them together, it looks just like the other piece that I just created with my Goodwill candle holders. Now, because I wanted a strong hold, I went ahead and used wood glue. Just make sure that you center the little candlestick to the big round and also the small little disc. And then just hold with some tape. Alright, so while that's drying, we're going to start with the top accent piece of the hurricane. Now this one is going to be the more complicated version, and it involves an embroidery hoop. You're going to want to take off the little screw that ties them together, and you're going to have to cut off those end pieces with the metal, because if you remove the metal, the wood actually splits. So you're going to have to go ahead and cut it off. Alright, so the reason this is going to be a little bit complicated is because the embroidery hoop wasn't the exact size as the hurricane. And since I couldn't find anything closer, I had to, just kind of work with this and steal a little bit of wood from another embroidery hoop to kind of make the correct size that I needed. If you can find an embroidery hoop that fits your hurricane, by all means, just go with that. Alright, so in order to get the same look as the Pottery Barn hurricanes, I needed to use 2 embroidery hoops for the top section. And what I did was, while one was drying with the smaller pieces that I needed to add, the other one on top was holding it together. You can see what I'm talking about here. Now, since the outer ring had to be a little bit bigger and I took a piece from it, I had to add a piece from somewhere else. So I just took a little piece of a craft popsicle stick to fill in that gap that you see right there. And these clips are actually fabric clips, and they worked just fine for holding this together. And as you can see, I actually placed one hoop a little higher than the other. Now, because the embroidery hoop was a little hard to work with, I actually used hot glue and E6000 to put them together. And then I used a wood filler in order to fill in the little gaps between the new pieces of wood, and I just sanded it and smoothed it out after it was dry. Once everything was sanded and dry, I did add a little bit of extra support by adding a little bit more hot glue between the rings, as you see here. And then it was off to spray painting. And I just used this Rust-Oleum oil rub bronze that I had left over from another project. Now, here is my Goodwill candle holder after it was spray painted. And then here is the one that I made from scratch. Now, I may have to repaint it with a different paint because in some areas, as you see right here, the paint didn't take. but overall, I think it looks pretty good. Now, once you decide to use these, please make sure to use E6000 to adhere the hurricanes onto the candle holders. But for video purposes, I'm actually just going to place them because I'm going to change them around to show you guys the different looks. Now, remember when I showed you the hard way to do the top portion of the hurricane? This is the easy way. And all you do is spray paint one of the same bases from the bottom and just place it on the top. Now in this version, you flip the hurricane and you encase the candle holder inside of it, and then just add the top portion. And then here is the easy one to the right, and then I'm going to show you guys what the other one looks like with the embroidery hoops. Now if you want to actually put a real flame burning candle, you would have to use the left one, because the one on the right there would be no oxygen, but those little Dollar Tree luminescent ones with the batteries work just fine as well. And here you see the wooden one on the right and the metal one on the left, and I think you can barely tell them apart. And if you want to be extra lazy and don't want to do any of the top portions of the hurricanes, I am using this little Dollar Tree smaller hurricane here, and all you have to do is place it or glue it on top of the candle holder and then just leave it, and it looks just good without the top rim as well. Alright, so let's see how we did. The Pottery Barn originals were $39 to $69, and I was able to recreate the hurricanes from anywhere between $4 and $12. Now the little one with the Dollar Tree hurricane was the one that cost me $4, and the other two cost me between $10 and $12. Now that's without the paint. But if you have anything dark on hand, just go ahead and use that and skip that expense. I think we did pretty good here. For this next look for less, I am going to be recreating this Carrara marble serving tray that I found over on House, and it's listed for $175. The first thing I knew I needed was a piece of wood or something that I can cover up and make look like marble. So I picked these brass cabinet pulls at my local Home Depot, and I got 2 of them to look very similar like the originals. Now I didn't get any footage of this, but the Latino engineer so nicely measured both sides of the board and its centers and drilled a couple of holes on either end for those cabinet pulls. So depending on what you use for the base, you may not need to do this, but I wanted to make sure I had a nice smooth surface, so I covered up any knots and any rough edges with wood filler. Then once I was done, I let everything dry overnight. Then I went over everything with a sanding block to make sure everything was nice and smooth. I made sure to wipe everything down and make it nice and clean, because then it was time for some marble contact paper. I got a nice heavy duty one from Amazon, and I'm going to try and link to the exact one that I got below. I cut it so that it would actually give me a few inches to wrap around the edges of the board. I actually separated the contact paper and I laid it down on my table, holding it with a few things on the edges, and then placed the board right on top of it. Then once I flipped it over, I used a card to smooth out any bubbles, working from the middle and out to the ends. Once I flipped it over, I made sure to pull the edges really tight, and again work from the center outwards. If you do attempt this, I suggest that you take your time and pay attention to details. The smoother your edges are, the more it will seem like it's actually marble. And here is how I got those crisp edges. Then once both ends were done in the same way, I pulled it up and over. This part is also optional, but I decided to cut another rectangle just slightly under the size of the entire tray so that I can cover up the board underneath. Next, I began to feel where the little pre-drilled holes were on the tray, and then I started making little incisions with a box cutter. With a small screwdriver, I poked the holes from one end to the other to open it up for the screws. Then all there was left to do was add the hardware. And if you were looking closely, you may have seen this tray in my dining room reveal video. Alright, so let's see how I did. The original was $175. Now I had to purchase the handles or the little cabinet pulls, which cost me $7 a piece. Now that's usually more than I would spend, but since it was only 2 of them and I really like their look, I thought it was well worth as a splurge. And the contact paper was actually about $8 or $9, and I didn't really use that much, so let's just say I used $4 worth. So it came out to be about $18 because everything else I already had on hand. Now this look for less had been a long time coming because I was a huge fan of these Sunburst mirrors that I would see all over the place, and they were quite expensive no matter what style you were looking for. And since there were so many styles available, I couldn't decide, so I thought the next best thing would be for me to just make my own. So for this, you're going to need shims. I got this at my local Home Depot. These come in a pack of 12. And for this project, you're going to need 16 packs. And they come for under $2. You're also going to need wood glue, and you're going to need something to clamp them down. Or if you don't have clamps, it's totally okay. You can use rubber bands, but you will need a lot of them. You will also need a mirror. I got this one from Dollar Tree. Alright, you're going to open up your first pack of shims and you're going to take out 3. And you're going to glue them together like this. When applying the wood glue, make sure you spread it out, because the more surface area that touches each other with the wood glue, the stronger hold you will have. Oh, and if you're wondering why my husband's hands are in the video and doing this, it's because he wanted to take lead on this project. He said he wanted to make sure that it was done correctly, so there you go. I kid you not. And then you're going to want to put them together like this. Now the shape that you're going to want to make is that one that you see to your right. First, you're going to clamp those 3 together like he's showing you right here. He's pretty particular about the wood projects in the house, so he told me he was going to demonstrate this one. Now, if any of your shims are bowed in the center, you may want to add an additional clamp in the center, or again, if you don't have it, you can use rubber bands. Now you're going to take the next 4 shims from your packet. You're going to apply wood glue in the same manner, and you're going to put them together like you see here. You have just created one of the sides. This will go on one of the sides of the 3 that you have drying right now. And as you can see, he's using rubber bands to hold them together while they dry. So it's totally possible it can be done with rubber bands. Then you're going to take the next 4 shims and you're going to do the same thing for the other side of the form. So by now you should have 2 sides and 1 center. You should have used 3 for the center and 4 for each of the sides, using 11 out of the 12 shims of the package. But make sure you keep that 12th shim because you are going to need it. Okay, so after those have dried, and we usually let them dry overnight, you are going to put all of 3 pieces together. Again, more wood glue. Make sure to clamp them down and then let dry. You will do this 16 times. Okay, so a year later, I'm just kidding. Now, after you have all of them done, you're going to start assembling the Sunburst. Remember that 12th shim from the package? This is where it's going to come in handy. See, you're going to need 1 shim between each of the forms because each form is the exact same shape, which means when you put them together, the 2 pieces at the end are going to be the same length. That additional shim is going to add a differing height between the 2, and I chose to make it longer. Again, make sure to use a lot of wood glue and spread it evenly because now you're building the structure, and the more glue you have, the better it's going to hold together. Also, as you are putting the Sunburst together, make sure you have something heavy at the very end to hold it in place while you keep adding them on the other side.
Oh my God.
And then you're just going to continue this all the way around until you reach the other end. You're going to be alternating the form with the single shim, the form, single shim, and so on. Alright, so once you reach the other side, you're going to want to wipe off any excess glue and also make any minor shifts to make sure it's the perfect shape. That's the perfect thing about wood glue, is that it has a little bit of give before it dries. And once you have the shape that you want, you're going to douse the center with more wood glue. I mean, you want to drench that thing. Don't hold back. This is the area where you're going to place your mirror, and I just took the mirror out of the Dollar Tree frame and I placed it right in the center over all of that glue. You're going to let this dry overnight as well. Alright, the following morning you're going to flip it over, and I'm sorry this is the only footage I have of that, but you're going to do the exact same thing, drenching it with more wood glue on the other side, and you're going to take that little sponge and you're going to really get it in all of those creases. Again, the more wood glue you use in all of those little crevices, the better the structure will hold.
Oh my God.
I let it dry overnight, and as you can see here, it is one solid piece. Now, I did think the mirror was missing a little bit of something, so I took an 8-inch embroidery hoop and I decided to use it for the frame of the mirror. I needed the embroidery hoop to look a little bit more weathered, just like the shims, so I added a little bit of pickling wash, and I also used a little bit of antiquing wax by Folgart that I love so much, and I was able to kind of make it match the Sunburst a little bit better. Then I used some E6000 to apply the embroidery hoop onto the mirror. And as you can see, it is a perfect fit. I removed any E6000 with a Q-tip that might have seeped out underneath the embroidery hoop, and I laid a heavy book on top to hold it together. And again, I let it dry overnight. The final piece was to install the hardware, and my husband decided that the best thing for this was one of those wire hanging kits. So he screwed these on either end and he added the wire between them, making sure that everything was nice and taut and it would not come undone. And of course, being the gentleman that he is, he hung it up for me. And here is the completed product. I am so proud I was able to finish this. It was a lot of work and waiting, but it was well worth the effort. I decided to keep the mirror like this and not paint it or anything. I liked the rustic touch it had. I liked the color of the wood. But of course, if you want to add color, change it up, do a nice gold glaze on it or something, you can definitely do it. Alright, so let's see how I did. The closest looking Sunburst rustic mirror that I found was at Overstock and it was going for $282. So each of the shim packs were $1.96 a piece. I used 16 of those. I also needed the mirror and the embroidery hoop. So my total came up to $35 because I had everything else on hand. Alright, so for my last all-time favorite look for less dupe that I have created so far, I am going to be tackling this two-tone square geometric wood wall plaque. I saw it at Kirkland's for $60 and I knew exactly what to use to recreate this for so much less. Now for this project, I decided to use the 36-inch poplar wood pieces that you can find at Home Depot. These are only $1.05 a piece, and I used 10 for this project. I also used these same ones when I created those faux farmhouse shutters this past winter. Now you will need to cut these down, and you can use this small miter saw kit, which is only $10. I'll go ahead and link to it below, or you can use an electric miter saw. You're also going to need some form of tape measure, and I personally like to use my fabric one. The original piece of art was 30 inches square, but this was too big for me, so I cut these down to 24 inches, and I cut 4 of them in this size. Now once everything was cut, I made sure to sand all of the edges to make sure they were nice and smooth. I used a hot glue gun for this project since it's going to be fairly light, and it holds very well. Also, since all of the pieces are 24 inches in length, in order to make a perfect square, you're going to need to attach them like you see here. Alright, so now that the frame is done, we're going to move to the next part, which is the large X in the back. So for this, I placed 2 pieces of wood diagonally across the square, and I made my marks with a pencil as to where I needed to make my cuts. I cut these pieces, sanded them, and then I attached them to the frame with some hot glue as well. Then in order to add a little bit more stability to the corners, I took some large popsicle sticks, traced them on the back corners, cut them down, and hot glued them to the ends. That way it made the frame a little bit more sturdier. Alright, so now we move on to the white square part of the frame. Okay, so for this, you're going to need 2 more poplar pieces. I cut them in half and I used 45-degree angles to cut the ends down. The outside measurement is going to be 18 inches and the inside measurement is going to be 15 inches. You're going to assemble these into a square and you're going to hot glue these pieces together as well. I cut down more popsicle sticks and used them to reinforce the joints on this as well. Hold off attaching this to the larger frame for right now. Now we're going to assemble the final piece, which is the smaller square with the 4 pieces of wood at all of its corners. For this, you're going to cut 4 pieces of wood, the outer edge being 10 inches and the inner edge being 7 inches. Again, assemble your square and then put together with more hot glue. Use a couple more popsicle sticks to reinforce those corners as well. Now you're going to place a new piece of poplar wood all the way from the top to the bottom down the center of the frame. Make sure the piece of wood is inside of the frame and then lay down the small square directly on top of it, making sure it's centered. To make sure, use some measuring tape at the top and the bottom and make sure that they're both the same distance from the frame. Make your markings with a pencil and then cut your pieces. Now we did use a jigsaw for this because it's a little bit trickier. However, you can use a small mini miter saw kit, or if you have a heavy duty box cutter, you can score the wood and snap it. Make sure you cut 4 of these. After they're cut, sand them down and then glue them on to your small square. Then use more popsicle sticks to reinforce these joints as well. Okay, so the next step is to either stain or paint these pieces. Now, the large square was white, so I had my cute little helper who was dying to get her hands on some paint and paint the large square white. I used my favorite chalk paint, White Adirondack from Folk Art. Alright, so after that one was done, we used some of the pickling wash in the color Driftwood, since I wanted it to have a coastal feel. And we went ahead and used this on the smaller square. Then finally, for the large frame and the X, I used some of the wood tint in Walnut, and I went ahead and stained everything. I used a chip brush to apply and I wiped off any excess. After all of the pieces were dried, I went ahead and sanded over them to give them a light distressing, and then I began to assemble. I laid the white frame down first, making sure it was even from all 4 corners, and I used hot glue to apply it onto the X. Then I placed the 3rd piece right on top. Now, since this was the final piece that was going to kind of hold everything together, I used some E6000 to adhere this square onto the white one. I then flipped over the piece and began hot gluing all of the pieces together from behind to make sure that everything was nice and secure. I made sure to hold on to any pieces that needed a little bit of extra pressure until the hot glue dried. That way it was nice and secure. And here is the finished product. Okay, so let's see how I did. The original was from Kirkland's at $60, and I was able to recreate this for only $10.50. Now, the only thing I needed to buy, because I had all of the paint and hot glue on hand, was the wood, which cost $1.05 a piece, and I only purchased 10 of them. So I think I did pretty good on this one. Well, that's it for today's video, and if you guys are wondering if I still have those items or DIYs, yes I do, which is why they made it to this list. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know which one of these was your all-time favorite. Now for those of you who are waiting for the update on the Look for Less challenge. It will be coming back, and I'll be bringing it back May of this year. However, it will not be every single month this year. It will probably be every quarter. So I'm hoping that we can get into second quarter this year by doing the invitation in May. Now the invitations for the upcoming Look for Less challenges are gonna be within my weekly videos, but I'll make sure to let you guys know which one of those videos have the invitation. So there won't be a small short invitation for the challenge. Again, it will be in one of my weekly videos. There you will find the date and time you need to submit your projects. Now, while I enjoyed having a co-host in my previous Look for Less challenge invitations, for right now, I am gonna be hosting the challenge myself. The rules will pretty much stay the same, but just make sure you look out for the date and the new times where we'll be uploading. As always, I will have a playlist. Just make sure you stay tuned for those dates and times to submit your projects. I hope you're excited, and I cannot wait for May to come so that we can go ahead and get started on our Look for Less challenge. All right, let me know if you're excited for the Look for Less challenge to come back, and I will see you guys again here next week for more home decor and DIY ideas. Until then, adios.